Welcome to this Innovative Farmers webinar on Herbal Leys and Dairy. It's lots of people signed up, which is great. Please note we are recording the session, so if you can't attend the whole thing, you can always ask for a recording or you can share the recording afterwards, but do note that it is being recorded and it will go up on our YouTube channel. We've got some great speakers today, which is excellent, and plenty of time for Q&A and for discussion, so hopefully we'll all have a bit of a discussion at the end. I'm going to take just a couple of minutes just to introduce Innovative Farmers and also the speakers as well before we get going. So Innovative Farmers is a programme managed by the Soil Association, which focuses on on-farm research, which is co-designed and led by farmers to test innovative agroecological practices. We've got roughly just under now 30 ongoing field labs across the UK, focused on a whole wide range of different topics, from dual-purpose poultry to tall grass grazing, herbal leys and so on. And we're just launching some new field lab learning networks, which are on-farm trials with extra money for knowledge exchange activities around them. So we're funded principally, our core funding comes from the King Charles Charitable Fund, but we also take part in other projects which are funded elsewhere. So two of our speakers have been very heavily involved in the Farm Net Zero project, which funded one of the field labs, which Andrew's going to be talking about. So just a little bit of background on this, which has just come to an end. It was a 5-year farming and community project in Cornwall, funded by the National Lottery Community Fund. And the idea was that it supported farmers to work towards net zero, using a network of demo farms and monitor farms. So it's been a really great project. And Andrew might talk a little bit more about his role in that. As I said, we've got some great speakers. Andrew Brewer, who is a pasture-based dairy farmer in Cornwall. Tom Gregory, who farms on the Devon-Dorset border. Dr. Daniel Enrique Hidalgo, who is the Senior Lecturer in Sustainable Dairy Production Science at the University of Bristol. Who was the researcher for Andrew's trial. Kate Still, who's head of farming programs at Soil Association and expert on livestock health and welfare, and Hannah Jones, who's been a key part of the Farm Net Zero project and is a farm carbon and soils advisor with Farm Carbon Toolkit. So it's going to be some really interesting speakers. Just to run through the agenda very quickly, Andrew's going to start off by talking about herbal leys in the dairy industry in general and about his milk quality field lab. Then Daniel is going to talk about the results which came out of that field lab, and then we'll have a very short Q&A just on that topic, just to get some immediate questions discussed. Then Tom Gregory is going to talk about some of his learnings from trials that he's been undertaking on his farm and some of the work he's been doing. Kate's going to talk about herbal leys and their link with animal health and welfare. And then Hannah's going to talk about herbal leys in the dairy context in general and what to consider. And then we'll have a Q&A and a discussion at the end. So without any further ado, let me pass over to Andrew. Andrew, thank you very much. And I will stop sharing my screen. There we go.
Is somebody sharing my slides?
Yes, I'm just going to pull them up now.
Matilda's just sharing. Zoom takes a minute.
Yeah. Great. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm very honoured to be speaking about our trial today. We reported the Farm Net Zero, which is just finished. Like as Laura said, it's a 5 years study. We've done all sorts of trials within those 5 years, measuring carbon, cover crops, how fast we could grow carbon, and we've got some really good data on that. So I'm heavily involved with Arla as well on their sustainability working group, and a lot of dairy farmers were asking, okay, if we're going to use a lot of herbal leys to improve our carbon, how was it going to affect our cows and our milk, the milk quality as well? Because that makes up a large proportion of your milk check. And we didn't really know, and nobody really done a lot of work on it. So we said, well, we've got the opportunity to do this. So if you can go on another slide, please. So yeah, so we basically Hannah and myself, we work really closely together now on lots of projects, and we said, well, if we develop a multi-species trial, can go on again, please. I'll just explain a little bit more about ourselves. So I farm in mid Cornwall with my wife Claire and a fantastic team of staff. We're all owned. We farm about 1,100 acres. We do about 200 acres of veg, either cabbage or potatoes, which we let out. But just helps with rotation. We're currently milking 450 crossbred cows through a 4896 parlor, and we're calving most predominantly in the autumn or late summer, sort of last week of July through for 9 weeks. And we do occasionally do down to TB status. We will calve for just 3 weeks in spring, which are the cows that we actually use for the trial, because we could then basically keep things really simple. They were relatively fresh, and we could see any differences coming from them. So, and next slide, please. So yeah, so basically what we did is the spring calvers, we split them into two groups. Daniel went through and split them to parity and as close as we could from previous milk records to try and get a fair and equal trial. And then basically we ran them as two X separate groups, milk separately right through, and then we recorded through, which Daniel will then go into more detail. But so we tried to be as fair and independent as we could. We also monitored using our sense hub collars. We used to monitor rumination to see if there was any major differences in that. So next slide, please. So basically, it was over a year that we ran the trial, or through the summer, from sort of grazing season, and we just wanted to see what the difference is between multi-species swards and milk yield and constituents through the year, because over multiple years, there are key KPIs that influence our business profitability, and obviously milk yield, fats and proteins make a big difference, but also fertility rates and your calving interviews, mobility scores, was there less lameness, more lameness, cell counts particularly as well, and potentially going forward mixed species and methane production. We haven't really gone into that, but maybe that's another step for another day, because it is coming up the line. With everybody's carbon footprints coming into account, we have to be looking at innovative ways of doing it naturally rather than potentially having to use feed additives. And so I want to try and keep things natural. We have a really important role. The public want natural, and if we can do that through a grazing based system and be rewarded for it, it's got to be the way forward. So yeah, next slide, please. So yeah, I've probably covered this already, to be fair. So our swards, the mixed species swards were ryegrass clover, cocksfoot, timothy, some festaloniums, red and white, and plantain, with a very small amount of chicory. We're finding that to work really well. It's absolutely altering our soil structures and is increasing our carbon within the soil. So we wanted to see how we could manage this and have a better understanding between the two groups to see if we could if we can prove it's working for us, and we've got data. One thing I've noticed, working closely with Arla, data matters. People listen to data, they don't listen to hearsay. So it's important that us as farmers have that data to back to get people and the customers, the supermarkets, to take notice of what's going on. So yeah, so I'll talk next, if I have the next slide, please, a little bit. So within my role with Arla, I'm heavily involved with the sustainability work. Their customers are really demanding lower footprints, and Arla have signed up for reductions, as many other milk buyers have. Arla are probably leading the pack with a lot of different ways, but they're looking at the whole system: the better climate, the clean air and water, and healthy land and soil. So our customers, the supermarkets, the Asdas, the Morrisons, the Tesco's of this world, they understand that they want to cut carbon. Okay, they have to cut carbon. They've all signed up to the IPCC standards, and so dairy is actually a large proportion of their emissions, the way it's accounted for. Okay, a lot of things that we all believe as dairy farmers and we understand aren't accounted for, and it's really important that we understand the system. But if we have proof from doing trials and such like, we can change minds with data. Next slide, please. So we wanted to look, as I said, we're looking at the soil and the dairy cows, and actually looking at nutrient use efficiency. And if we've got the right forage crops going into cows, we can understand if we're getting better nutrient use efficiency. Daniel will go into protein levels and stuff of different swards, but actually we're probably getting a better nutrient use efficiency through the mixed species swards. and it's altering our soil, but it's actually altering a lot of other small things that we can't see, like ammonia emissions, and that whole nutrient loop is being altered by using different plants and a different variation of multi plants. So it's data again. It's that having that key data. Next slide, please. So, some of the things that are actually bringing in, perhaps I might be in trouble for sharing some of these things, but this is the thing that IPCC in particular are looking for. It's ammonia emissions are coming up. Carbon sequestration is hopefully going to be coming into the calculations of your carbon footprint finally, but it's starting to reward semi-natural grassland and multi-species swards, because they do it on a points-based system. So if you're doing different things, you score points, and points means prizes and a slightly better milk price. But it's actually helping your resilience as an individual business by doing these things. So that's just some of the things coming up. But go on to the next slide again, please. So so the soil, they have what they call the big five, the big levers that actually they see are making the biggest effects to carbon footprint. You can see there on the left hand side, there are feed efficiency, fertilizer use, land use, protein efficiency, and animal robustness. But actually, that all comes back, and the sustainability feed at the bottom, which they class as soya use. But do we actually need to use it? But it actually all comes back to the soil, and understanding that soil can have terrific effects on all those levers. And also, if you've got in grazing as well, there should be an arrow perhaps down to manure handling, because if you can graze for more days, you've got less manure to handle. So there's it's lots of different things that having our soils working better for us and having the right species will affect that thing. So this is what the trial was looking at as well, to look at maybe feed efficiency and fertilizer use and proteins as well, so that it would have an effect. So I think that's my last slide, maybe one last slide, but just a pretty picture, just to make people have a think today. Have we got all the answers? Possibly not, but it's a start and maybe can lead to other things. And I think that's myself done roughly on time for Daniel.
Brilliant. Thanks, Andrew. That's really interesting. Really interesting about the KPIs for dairy. So we just hand over to Danielle now, who's going to talk about the results of the trial.
Can you see my screen?
Yes. Brilliant.
I can see everybody's faces, so let me just hide you. So, hi everyone. I'm Daniel Enriquez Hidalgo. I think Laura already presented me, and Andrew has done a very good job helping me with the introduction of the project. So I'm going to be going a little bit quicker in the very first slides, right? So basically, the main idea of this trial was actually to have an understanding how herbal leys would behave in a commercial setting, right? Yeah, let's gonna have a look at it. Come on. Okay, just as a little bit of introduction of why we end up doing this. We know that traditionally for the last couple of decades at least, or even longer, the monocultures or even monocultures of perennial ryegrass, and maybe sometimes even including white clover, have been the dominant swards, and in the UK, but also in general temperate climates, right? And this has been mainly for these very good characteristics that they have proven to have, like for example, being highly productive. They are quite good responding to external inputs, particularly fertilizers, right? And also these external inputs costs have been quite low. They can produce a very good herbage quality, and although they have a growth seasonality, but it has been fairly reliable and also constant or frequent along the years, right? And I put it a little bit in brackets, but they are relatively easy to manage. So it's not a complicated management, or at least we have developed some really good practices to understand how we can or we should be managing this type of swards, right? And last but not least, there has been a long intensive genetic selection process so that they can actually develop, and we have very good varieties of them that they can develop and show their potential in the fields, right? However, things have been changing quite rapidly in the last couple of years at least, or even the last decade. So sustainability, as Andrew was already explaining to us, it has become a major issue for everybody else, right? Global warming effects is now a reality, is not a thing for the future. And particularly here in the UK, we are facing erratic precipitation and also droughts, more frequent droughts, which were not so common some years ago, right? Adding to that, we have had some geopolitical changes as well to the panorama of the world and also in the UK, and this has implemented some or putting some questions to some of the potential characteristics or benefits of the single or mono species or bi-species swards that we were just mentioning some minutes ago. So, for example, what has happened with the response to external inputs now with the weather conditions very changeable and less predictable, these responses are not so well understood. The low external input cost, that is, I think, is something from the past, particularly fertilizer, and we think that perennial ryegrass is highly dependent on nitrogen fertilizer. The prices have been going up, and sometimes they stabilize, but as I said, due to the different aspects that happens nationally and internationally, they will continue to climb up, right? In terms of the quality, we have become more aware that not only the macronutrients are important, but also what happened with micronutrients, like the minerals that you can see here to the right-hand side of the screen as well. And perennial ryegrass is a little bit deficient in that type of nutrients, right? And due to all these factors, the reliability and the constant growth of these swards has been a little bit jeopardized, and this raised some questions about the potential resilience moving forward of these swards, right? As that, we have this alternative, the multi-species swards or Herbal Leys, or the inclusion of more different species, because they can potentially offer us some benefits, and we have different benefits that they can offer. Andrew went through a couple of them, but I just wanted to highlight some of them to try to set the scene and understand why we're looking for them, right? If we compare to the monocultures or the PRGWC, which is the perennial ryegrass and white clover swards, they can potentially increase the productivity of the swards. They can extend the grazing season in both sides, so a little bit earlier and a little bit later. And this is basically because we have some complementary growth curves of the different species that we are included in the swards, right? In the chart that you can see at the right-hand side of the screen, you can see the growth curves of ryegrass or grasses in gray, and in black you can see the white clover. And what you can see is that they help, or they are complementary in terms of the growth that you could have. And at the bottom left, you can see more species that can actually increase the growth of the perennial ryegrass growth that is in orange, for example, right? Some other very interesting characteristics, nitrogen fixation, and this is not really done to the herbs, but mainly for the legumes that you can include in them. That's one of the key components on these multi-species swards. Also, we have a better root system. Here in the picture, you can see how the roots are. They have deeper with tap roots, mainly due to the herbs, but not only exclusively. Like, for example, red clover as well has a deep tap root, and also have more denser in general, the swards having more species, right? All these roots architecture, or more complex and deeper, helps the swards to have a better exploitation of the soil column, and also to bring over some nutrients that was not at reach for grasses that they have a more a root system that is more shallow, right? Like that, we have the potential to increase the nutrient utilization and offering these micronutrients to the cattle, right? Or the animal that is going to be grazing on top of these ones, right? And also, we could have some lower nutrient losses that is retained within the system. Last but not least, very important, they can improve the biodiversity and also offer some controlling on of and on species because they have a better coverage of the ground. And now we could have some expected benefits for the animal responses. I'm not going to be covering much about soil. I know that Tom and Hannah, they're going to be talking a little bit more about it, but I'm going to be focusing mainly on the animal side of things because that was our main target of within the study, right? This is something that you can find out there, and this is the expectation of Herbal Leys that they can bring over some benefits when compared to the lower level of species swards, right? Like they can be more nutritious, as we mentioned already. They have a higher mineral content as well. They could potentially increase the productivity of the animals, and this could be related to the higher intakes that they can allow for the animals to have. They have phytochemicals that they could, for example, increase the average daily gain and also could be beneficial in terms of the health or welfare of the animals, right? Some of the species could have as well anthelmintic properties, particularly we think about chicory, but some fern and beardfoot trefoil, that they have condensated tannins, which as well, along with some of the phytochemicals, can have some antimethanogenic properties and reducing what Andrew was saying, like a natural way to try to reduce methane for the animals, right? And last but not least, some of these species have been proven to have some diuretic effects. So basically diluting the nitrogen that is coming through the urine, so causing less problem with nitrous oxide emissions, for example. This is a very cool, very interesting study. It was a meta-analysis, so putting all together results coming from different 11 studies that have been done previously, right? However, they were known from Europe, which was quite shocking. It's a little bit outdated 5 years ago, but surprisingly, there are not many studies that have been carried out in Europe and even in the UK for looking at milk production, right? However, some of the responses or the effects that we could find from this type of swards, according to this literature review, was an increase of 1.2 kilos of milk yield when compared to the counterparts with less species. Also, 1.3 plus energy-corrected milk kilos, and a very light increase in the solids or in fat and protein in the milk, right? They found that the major effects were seen when these particular species were present, the chicory and the plantain. And in terms of the herbage, which by the end of the day is what we're offering to the animals and they can express their potential, they find that they have lower dry matter percentage or content, 3 points, almost 7 points less neutral detergent fiber, and less 1.2 less points of acid detergent fiber. So basically less fiber, which should be or bring a better quality herbage for the animals, right? However, in these parameters, crude protein, water-soluble carbohydrates, and organic matter digestibility, they should be having similar contents, right? So as I said, and Andrew also highlighted, Unfortunately, there are not many studies that have been looking at what are the milk responses in the UK. And that's what led us to the main objective of this study, which was actually trying to answer this question, is look how these swards behave, or how cows behave grazing these swards when compared to the perennial ryegrass white clover swards, right? And again, the specialty is that we run this trial at Andrew's farm, right, in a commercial setting, which is not an experimental setting, which makes a unique experiment. Right, the farm, for those that don't know where it is located, it is located, the Ennis Barton farm is located in Fraddon. You can see there in the picture of Cornwall over there, where you can see the location, the exact location of the farm. Andrew already mentioned we use 46 spring calving of his dairy cows. And what I did initially is looking at very similar animals that had similar calving dates, lactation, a number of lactations, and also the previous milk and solids production, and try to separate it into quite homogeneous groups so that they could graze under similar conditions, and the responses should be coming from the swards, not from the genetic characteristics of the animals, right? We split these 46 cows into groups of 23 cows, and each of them were grazing either the multi-swards or Herbal Leys swards that you can see in the picture in the middle, or the perennial ryegrass white clover swards that you can see in the picture at the bottom, right? And they were grazing since more or less the last week of April until the mid-September of 2024. We took milk recordings on the weeks 1, 4, the 6th, the 11th, the 13th, and the 21st of the trial, and we took milk composition in the weeks that you can see over there, in the 1st, 4th, the 6th, the 9th, and the 21st week of the trial, right? I want to call your attention because this could help us a little bit to understand what happened in terms of the responses that we had, that there was a surprise, a drought running from the 13th week until the 21st week of 2024, right? For those that don't remember about it, right? But we had to look at what the cows were eating while on trial. So once a month, we came to take some forage samples in the areas that the cows, a couple of days before the milk samples were taken, so that we could have a better relationship or understanding on what are the characteristics of the swards and how this influence the output, the milk output of the cows, right? We took samples in the following 3 strips to be grazed in 2 of the swards, right? We took 3 quadrats within each of these strips, so 9 quadrats along the area of the 3 following days to be grazed. We took a composite samples to estimate to be dried, and also this sample was, after dried, sent over to AFP to have an analysis of the nutritional composition using near-infrared spectroscopy, right? We took another sample, which is that you can see here in the picture at the bottom, to estimate the botanical composition. So we took this sample and we separated in the different components that they were present on the sward to understand, okay, who is contributing to what, right? And we also did a measurement in terms of the heights of the swards using a ruler before and in the strips that have been grazing the day the day before that we took the measurements. We measure how depth the cows were grazing those ones. Okay, let's try to have a look at the results. So you're going to see a couple of these tables, right? And you can see the perennial ryegrass white clover swards, which is represented in green, and the multi-swards species in blue, right? If you see in the 5th column, you see the effect of the sward type. So the asterisk means that they have had some statistical significance. So there is an effect over there. And we can see that there is a strong effect, right? For these characteristics, what we were offering to the cows in terms of the herbage mass, the multi-sward species, swards, they had almost 40% more herbage mass, so they have way more herbage available for them to be grazing when compared to the perennial ryegrass white clover swards. This was reflected, of course, in the height of the herbage were measured using the ruler. And as a result, as they had more herbage on offer, they tend to graze a little bit more lenient, this cows, 11% for both of these parameters, right? But what we had in this herbage, right? So in these figures, you can see in the left-hand side the different species that were present on the perennial ryegrass, white clover, swards. This is in a percentage of the dry matter basis. And here we have the different species that they were there. Not surprised, you can see that the grass, which is the yellow line over there, is the one that was dominated. The composition ranging from 80 to 100% almost of the species. But there was some legumes, which is the green line over there, especially in the later part of the experiment. Nearly 8% of white clover, of clovers or legumes, which were the two main species, and also weeds were 4% of the species present there. In the right-hand side of the graph, you can see there the species with the multi-species swards, and what you can see is that there is more variation in terms of the species, how they have been changing. And one thing that I want to call your attention is that, particularly in the later part of the grazing season, we had the herbs and the legumes complementing each other and having a higher proportion of the herbage that was present on the swards. If you can see at the bottom, you can see a red line, which is the one that I wanted to highlight, is the period when we had the drought, so that you can see clearly where and how this was affected. As for example, you can see the herbs in blue on the right-hand side. They were dropped from the week 17 to the 21. So likely this could have been an effect of the drought that has affected. And we can see that the legumes went up, and we know that they are coming from Mediterranean climate, so they like it. Particularly the white clovers in the week 21, they start ramping up. And this happened in both swards, right? Okay, but what quality was that we had in terms of the herbage that we were offering here? So here you have the different parameters of the samples that we got, a very similar table as the one we saw in terms of the physical characteristics of the herbages. But I want to call your attention of the main differences that we had. So a huge difference in terms of the dry matter, and we saw already that the Herbal Leys or the mixed multi-species swards, they do have lower dry matter content when compared to the perennial ryegrass white clover swards. We also had a massive difference in terms of crude protein and also the neutral detergent fiber, being that the perennial ryegrass white clover swards had a relatively lower, almost 30% lower protein than the counterparts, and have also higher neutral detergent fiber when compared to the Herbal Leys, right? Also at the bottom over here, you can see it in terms of water-soluble carbohydrates. The multi-species swards had way lower water-soluble carbohydrates, 30% lower, and also that the multi-species swards have a higher ash content, which is basically representing the mineral content that these swards had, right? What we're having here is a counterbalance in terms of the characteristics or the chemical characteristics that we have in the herbage. We can see that the grass-dominated swards, they have maybe or likely a slightly deficit in terms of the protein that can be compensated by the higher rapid soluble carbohydrates that you can see that they have a higher amount, right? So they're compensated in terms of the nutrients that are available in these swards, right? But if you see in the very right-hand side of this table, there are some characteristics that had some interaction. So this means that there was not a sustained effect across the entire treatment. And I'm going to show you the most interesting differences that we saw along the trial, right? Oh, the lines should have come up afterwards. In this graph over here, you can see what happened in terms of the crude protein, and there is not much surprise. If you remember the amount of legumes that we had over there at this part of the grazing season, that's when they start to grow better, because that's when they like, and the conditions are better suited for them. And we can see that both swards had an increase in the protein content that they have. More so the Herbal Leys here in blue, right? When we see what happens with the water-soluble carbohydrates, we see that constantly the grass-dominated swards, they have higher water-soluble carbohydrates than the Herbal Leys ones, and particularly at the start when there was no drought issues, and then likely here was affected, and onwards a little bit the responses that these two swards had in terms of the water-soluble carbohydrates. In terms of the digestibility, we didn't see that much differences. At the beginning, the perennial ryegrass white clover swards had a slightly higher digestibility, but we can say that overall the digestibility of the both swards were pretty similar, right? Okay, but what does it mean when we look at the milk characteristics? As I already said, some of the nutritional characteristics of the herbage, they were having an effect that they were canceling out the potential benefits that one of them could have. And as a response, we didn't see much difference in terms of the milk yield that these cows were producing, neither the milk solids. We had a very similar production of yield and solids for both of the swards. No statistical differences that you can see over here. There were some weak variations, but nothing unexpected, right? And no really interactions. The milk protein a little bit for a couple of weeks that were higher, constantly higher for the Herbal Leys, right? Fat was very similar, and the lactose content is almost exact between the two groups, right? So with that, I think that we can conclude from the study that we carried out at Andrew's farm that despite that we saw some herbage characteristics in terms of differences between the two swards, the cows, when they were grazing both of these type of swards, they end up having a very similar production in terms of milk yields and milk composition in these farm conditions, right? What we can say of the take-home messages, or some of them from this study, is that this study gives us a little bit of information of the dairy responses when the animals are grazing these multi-species swards, particularly in these conditions, right, and the commercial farming. And also that this type of management with these multi-species swards didn't have a negative effect on the milk production. However, we know from what we have said and the comments that were done by Andrew and that you're going to be hearing along the day, that there are some other potential benefits that need to be taken into account when you are including these species in the swards, right? Unfortunately, due to the resources that we have available in this study, we weren't able to assess everything that was related to the grazing the two systems, right? And with that, I want to say a big thanks to Andrew, especially for allowing us to run this trial in his farm. It was tough and hard to run this trial over there. And also to Laura Good, for conducting and leading this trial. And also to all the funders that we had in the trial that supported the trial, right? And I think that was more or less the end of my talk.
Brilliant. Thanks, Danielle. That was really interesting and great to see some of those graphs and seeing the changes over the season. That's really cool. Excellent. We've got a few questions in the chat. I'll just read them out now, and I'll leave the more general ones till later, the Q&A at the end and the discussion, if that's okay, just because we are quite tight for time at the beginning. So Jan asks, what height were the quadrats cut at? I can't remember. It was mirroring the residuals, wasn't it? It was mirroring.
Yeah, it was to mirror a 1600 residual, 1600 kilo dry matter residual.
Brilliant, thank you. And Ian says, what N rates were used on the two sward types?
Zero artificial.
Oh,
just dirty water. Okay, this will be 2,000 gallons an acre. So that's right. I'm multi-language. I'm too old now.
Jan's got it's more of a statement. Amazed at how low the sward CP figures are when compared to the figures reported by HDB weekly on farm monitoring. I don't know if either of you have a view on that at all.
That's the question coming from who you?
From Jan in the question.
No,
section.
it's no nitrogen.
Okay.
Yeah, and this could be some of the reflections that we are seeing. Why the grass only swards they could have they had actually a relatively low protein content because there was no fertilizer. So this was expected. Yeah, you should expect that the nitrogen is coming or either from dirty water, from what Andrew said, any manure, fertilizer, artificial fertilizer that is not here, or the legumes that they were actually in a higher proportion in the Herbal Leys, and they were actually bringing over some nitrogen. So
Brilliant, thank you. And Steve says, have you any information on the persistence of species of the herbs under grazing? It's to Andrew, I guess.
So we've used chicory for 20 odd years, but I would say the herbs wise, plantain is the one that sticks around. It's a natural weed in the southwest of Cornwall. So if we can get a well-bred weed, it'll stick around. And we're finding that to be far more suitable and probably more palatable. And then some of the research coming out of Ireland is showing lower methane on plantain swords as well, and probably more so New Zealand. So plantain would be my preferred herb now.
Brilliant, thank you. And then Lupo says, as herbage protein was low, what was associated milk ureas? Might be getting quite technical on this one.
I don't think that we have the milk ureas.
Our milk ureas always run very low, like around 100 to 100, well, between 80 and 150. So yeah, and that reflects the lower protein probably.
But that was done at the tank level, isn't it, Andrew? So we didn't have information about the urea.
No, we didn't measure the milk urea between the trials, but I'm just saying as a herd.
Angus says, how many grazings through the season?
I don't have that information, Andrew. Do you know how many grazings you managed to do? We had the drought in between that compromised quite a bit.
Yeah, I'm struggling to remember, but we were basically on about a 28-day round, 28 to 30, and it would be much the same between the two different species. And we would graze down to like a 1600 residual.
Is there any ME data for this study or inferred? Sorry, I don't know what ME data is.
MDs.
ME data. Sorry, I don't know what
dry
that
matters.
means.
The dry matters that
no, metabolizable energy.
Okay.
No, but it's written here DM.
No, ME is a different question, maybe. Is there any ME data for this study?
ME is metabolizable energy. No, unfortunately, we didn't get that those results from the analysis that we carry out.
Okay. And do you include grazing lucernes in the multi-species swards?
No, we're sort of a relatively acidic soil, so yeah, lucerne would probably struggle here a little bit. And going back to the question on ME, you can calculate from that figure from the digestibility figures. I think
you can estimate but there are more factors that are involved on the ME. But yeah, we didn't get that those results coming from the analysis that we carry out, unfortunately. So yeah, we cannot report in energy.
Okay. There are some other questions in the chat which I'll leave to the end, just because they're a bit more general in nature and might be relevant to Tom as well. So I'm just picking out the ones that are relevant specifically to Andrew and Danielle. What else? Have I missed any questions? I can't see any more that aren't relevant to later. Here's one. The fat and protein percentages of the milk shown on the slide seem to be quite low, especially for crossbred cows, below 3% from memory. Did you have a comment on that?
Yeah, so our samplers are not ICAR approved, but it's consistent between the two groups. So, I admit that they're wrong, but it's just the sampling system that we use does throw up these big differences compared to what our bulk sample would do. So it's down to that, but it's a similar system. You know, it's a comparable system between the groups.
Okay.
There's another question here that is relevant to the trial that is asking about if the higher mineral content coming from Mark, higher mineral content of the multi-species swards have any effects on cow health or having a potential reduction on that need for supplementation. I guess that due to the relatively low number of animals, any aspects that you could see on the health of the animals will be very hard to estimate. I wouldn't say that it had any potential health effect that was standing out, right? Andrew, maybe you can comment on anything if you saw any differences in between them.
So measuring rumination on the scent sub, there was virtually no difference in the rumination, and the empty rate, in calf rate, then there was, I think, 1K difference, something like that. So nothing really significant.
Okay.
And to be honest, just to complement, I think that this could be one of the issues, like the number of animals that we tested. It doesn't really allow us to say that it's going to be any more strong effect in the terms of the health effects.
Okay, should we move on to Tom, and then I'll just go through the chat as well and just check that we haven't missed anything, and any of the broader questions we can discuss at the end. Brilliant, Tom, if you're ready.
Right, see if I can get this going.
Yep,
Is
that's
that
looking good. That's it. Brilliant, thank you.
Right, I just counted. I've got about 20 slides, and so I'm just gonna, what's the time? Monitor. Monitor how I get on. Please tell me to speed up if need be. I'm going to do sort of an overview of us. I'll talk about us, that's me and my wife, what we've been looking at and a trial we've been involved in. So, home farm dairy is where our base is. We're milking 600 cows on 2 sites, 400 organic cows, 200 conventional cows. The whole business is 1,800 acres, which includes mainly dairy with a small amount of beef and arable. The beef obviously coming from the dairy cows, and the arable is supporting the dairy, mainly for forage security, but also a project to try and grow our own homegrown proteins using bicropping and different things. So I think we're about 1,200 acres organic, 700 acres conventional. The 1,200 acres is 300 acres of arable, and the rest is the dairy. And the 700 acres on the other farm is all dairy. So going back to sort of 2018, 2019, I started to really analyze our AgriNet data. We had at that point 4 or 5 years of good data, and I was starting to see a very stagnant trend of grass production across our farm. We had leveled at 7.5 tons of dry matter per hectare, which was a range of sort of 12 to 5 ton, something like that. And what we were seeing was you'd plow up a lay and it would do 12 ton, and after 5 to 7 years, it was down to 5 tons, something like this, with an average of 7.5 ton. So we weren't really actually increasing production by doing these total full reseeds with break crops of peas and barley, mainly whole crop, which was, I've called it conventional organic. Use ryegrass and white clover, break up with a whole crop, and then go back again. So not only did we have sort of stagnant grass production, but we also see here, these are soil samples from 2014 and 2018, I think. The purple is decreasing P and K indices, and the green is increasing P and K indices. So the method of farming, this sort of standard conventional organic, was not only did we have stale grass production or not increasing grass production, we also had decreasing soil indices. And that started me on a path to sort of try and challenge what it was that we were doing and why we were doing it. And I think the education I had in agriculture was the left-hand path, the agronomy, the chemical path, where nutrients are soluble and they move with the water and the roots pick them up, or the roots use a bit of chemical to release the nutrients, and you apply the nutrients with muck, FYM or slurry, and they're taken up by the plant and the plant grows. And I started learning about regenerative and agroecology approaches and how the soil really worked. And that moved me on to doing the Elaine Ingham Soil Food Web course and really digging deep into how the soil worked, how it functioned, how to make compost. It's a huge course, which I found really, really useful. We also were involved in a few other projects and groups where we could continue our learning, share our learnings, and learn from others, which was definitely really useful. One of the things I think the big thing from it wasn't, do I need herbal leys? Do I need compost? It was system thinking. Actually, all of these things work together much better than they do as individuals. So we started looking at optimizing tillage, increase in soil health. So from the course, I did microscope training, and this is some pictures from the microscope of some fungi, rethink grazing management, and then nutrient management. We purchased a compost turner to make our turner FYM into an aerobic compost. Again, learnings from the course. And this is using, oh, I've gone too far. That was a disc spreader that we were able, one of the big projects I worked on was turning FYM that came out of the sheds in the winter and turn that into a compost that we could spread during the growing season using a disc spreader or band spreader rather than a rear discharge spreader. So we're applying solid nutrients during the growing season rather than over the winter. Again, on nutrient management, this is compost going in a drill. So using biology and nutrients in the drill and spraying on fields. Another thing we were looking at was diversity. So this is a diverse cover crop on the arable farm. I think there was 12 species, and I think it was, from memory, it was 36 tons of fresh weight per hectare, which was 6 tons of dry matter per hectare that was topped and incorporated into the ground, which provided the nutrients required to grow a crop of wheat and beans at 1.5 tons per hectare of each, assuming that a portion of the nitrogen came from the beans, and it was a 50% release of nutrients in the first year. And then these are the wheat and beans that we were growing. So diversity again, growing the wheat and beans. That field did 2 tons an acre in 2023, our first year of doing it. And when we combined and separated, the wheat actually came back at 16% protein alone without the beans, which, so as an organic farmer, protein is really expensive. So that was really good. And then more importantly, and more relevant for this webinar, is herbal leys. So looking at herbal leys and adding that diversity into our ryegrass and clover lays at home or reseeding to Herbal Leys on our arable platform. The arable platform was ridden with docks, and we were actually using chicory to outcompete the docks as one of our solutions. So, brilliant. We're going to use Herbal Leys. Great. We're going to get SFI payment, even better. Actually, right. Okay. So now we've made that decision. How do we get the SFI payment across the whole farm without ploughing up the whole farm and doing total reseeds? So we used a multitude of different approaches. This was a horse avatar 4-meter drill, direct drilling straight into stubble to put Herbal Leys in. And we also used an earth drill, which is a direct drill, not quite as impressive as that one. And what we saw on both those drills was quite a slow establishment and maybe not perfect. I'm going to run through this really quick, and then you can, if anyone's got any questions, they can we can go more into it. So we use 2 different types of direct drills, and the scratch harrows you saw earlier on to try and create tillage on some of the occasions. Slow establishment was probably the problem on these drills, allowing the creeping grasses in the grass fields to cover up the slots before the lay maybe got established, and on the arable field, the more annual weeds. So this was a Missouri strip till drill. This was pretty impressive. When we did this strip till, we used our cultivator machine twice, then used the Pro Till, then used the cultivator, and then rolled. And what we were aiming for was like a 50% disturbance. We did this in 5 fields on the same farm in the same day, and we basically had 5 different results. All those fields might have been on the same farm, but they were had different history. So the field we're in now, on this picture, actually was just a complete failure. And what I think was going on here was we had such poor soil health and soil nutrition. This was a rotational field on an organic farm that had really been farmed out, and it just completely failed. And I think all we did was grow a load of crap annual weed grasses and perennial weed grasses from this field. But other fields which had better health, there were some permanent pastures, and it worked really well on. And some other rotational fields just seemed to grow chicory, but we didn't actually see it for about 18 months, which was interesting. This is a drill we built ourselves. Again, on the minimum tillage, we were using this to go into fields that didn't have any herbs and may also have had compaction for low cost 1-pass solution to trying to establish and release compaction. Compaction and water holding capacity, two really big things highlighted in, I think, the Niels Corfields does his talk, and after that talk, this is where we learned about compaction actually could be a massive cause to production and success of these things. So if we can release compaction and put seeds in on the same pass, the drill cost, I think, 2.5 grand, and the subsoiler cost 2.5 grand, and I bought half of it, so it cost 1,250 quid, and then we got a grant from Wessex Water on the cedar, so I think the whole thing was about £5,000. And what we found, this was quite successful in what we're using at the moment, because that slot, while it's leaving compaction, also cuts roots and creates a nice bit of tillage and releases competition for the seedlings. And then this is on the arable farm, where we're still doing an amount of full cultivation. And this is a drill, again, another drill that we built. We bought a very simple Accord time drill for 800 quid, and then built a liquid fert application kit to go on it, so that we could put compost extract, nutrients, and sort of amendments down the drill with the seed. And this is sort of following on from the learnings from Elaine Ingham, where you would dress the seed, do a soil drench, and then do 2 foliars as well as a compost afterwards, or before, sort of in the autumn. I think, and then so innovative farmers, our involvement with them has been on a mob grazing field lab, or extended grazing or tool grazing, does extended pasture resting after grazing, improves soil microbiology and soil health. So the basis of this was a 3-year trial occurring at 6 farms, comparing a control plot managed routinely with a treatment plot to control. The control and treatment were side by side on a similar field. So what we did on our farm was we had a 22-acre field that a few years previously we put a track through the middle of it. Both sides had always been farmed the same, so we used that field. One side was managed. One side was managed for tool grazing or mob grazing, and the other side was managed as rotational grazing. The idea of the trial was we'd seen on another field on the farm where we were really struggling with yields on this field. We tried break crops, we tried reseeding, we tried manure applications, nothing seemed to be working. One year we laid it up for silage. We thought that might let it grow up, that might help. And then we ran short of grass. So we ended up by accident mob grazing. I don't think I'd even heard of mob grazing by that point. And suddenly this field just came to life, and I had no idea what it was that we'd done or how to recreate it. So that was the sort of premise for this trial. I've gone a little bit too far. So 6 farmers, two sites, 3 years. One we just carried on farming as normal, and one was mob grazed or had longer rest periods. And after 3 years, these are some of the findings. So soil moisture and total bacteria and fungi numbers were higher. This is on the trial. There was improved soil structure and rooting depth. The fungi bacteria ratio was significantly higher in the trial plots. Forage quality was largely consistent. Macro and micronutrient levels were higher. Some farmers grew more forage under the tool grazing trial. So I think the headlines are, some of us grew more. After we understood what we were doing, we weren't losing milk. And then what I'm going to finish on, because I think this is really important when looking at soil health, which is probably one of the KPIs for our farms, looking at the fungal to bacteria ratio from 2022 to 2025 is pretty impressive. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thanks, Tom. That's so interesting to see that graph, isn't it? To see that change. And great to hear about your challenges reseeding. I'm going to pass quickly over to Kate. You talk a little bit about animal welfare.
Thank you, Laura. And just very quickly following on from Tom, thank you very much to Tom, who's obviously I helped sort of coordinate the trial that he was just talking about. We have just got to a point where we're just finalizing the final report, and thank you very much for sharing those initial results. But I think we probably will want to have another session or some more time to share a bit more detail from the trial and from some of the other trialists. We're also hoping to sort of develop more of a learning network on the back of that trial. So I will be in touch more basically on that trial. Sorry, just thinking aloud. So I'm very conscious of time, and I know you all have lots of questions for Tom and more for Daniel and Andrew and things. So I'm just going to whittle through these, and some of it has already been covered anyway. But I just wanted a moment to bring together a little bit the kind of whole health aspect of Herbal Leys, and it being, as mentioned before, the sort of system of many parts add to a greater benefit than some of the individual benefits that have also been mentioned as we've gone along this lunchtime. So from a nutritional point of view, a lot of the evidence from the trial at Andrews has demonstrated, you've got high protein content, you've got good levels of micronutrients, which is really key in terms of, animal health and resilience. And also the complexity of some of the different plants and species that you have within the sward add to a more digestible forage overall and help improve rumen stability, which again has sort of positive health benefits and increases resilience for the animal. We've mentioned around parasite control and the anthelmintic properties, and I'll just go into a little bit more detail in a second, both that kind of anthelmintic benefit of the high concentrated tannins of some of the species that we've mentioned, but also I think a lot of it is around the grazing approach and that tall grass, long rest period approach that has been described that sort of has added benefits, not just the species themselves. And then lastly, which is really why I wanted to talk to you, was just to share a little bit about this, the positive welfare benefits that some of these multi-species swards can provide, just in terms of choice and variety, and giving animals the additional pleasure of being able to choose different things to eat, and the positive effects that that can have on their overall well-being, their longevity, their overall resilience. So all of these combined, add up to positive benefits to the animal. Because I think Herbal Leys, there's been a lot of evidence around the benefits for soil health and climate, reducing nitrogen use, improving soil carbon storage, all of these different benefits, the resilience in terms of low rainfall. But in terms of the benefit to the animal, I think there's, lots of other things that we could be looking at as well. So very quickly on the parasite control, as I mentioned, as Daniel's mentioned about the anthelmintic properties of species like chicory and sainfoin and bursfoot trefoil, and this is largely around these naturally occurring polyphenolic compounds that are in that occur within the tannins. And the direct anti-parasitic activity relates to a reduction in nematode egg hatching, larval development, and the mobility of the larval stage. So there's been quite good amounts of evidence that demonstrates those concentrated tannins have a anthelmintic impact on those larvae and eggs, and help reduce the parasite burden that animals are going to be facing. But I think another key benefit that sits alongside that is the fact that within, the advised approach to grazing Herbal Leys, which is to leave this much longer residual so that you've got all this leaf matter to be able to photosynthesize and get growing again, and also to prevent the reduction of species diversity by animals grazing out all of the good bits that they like, is making sure you leave this kind of 7 to 10 centimeter residual. And the biggest risk in terms of parasite is in that bottom 5 centimeters of the sward. So if you've got animals only grazing down to 7-10 centimeters, then they're not got that into that high risk area at the bottom of the sward near the soil. So all of these combined benefits are having an effect. Equally, the longer rest periods that are being encouraged, again through getting longevity out of these Herbal Leys, is then allowing parasites within the sward to desiccate and die. So you're coming back to a much cleaner sward overall. So I think, this combination of the species that you've got in there combined with the grazing approach, having this added benefit. And then I don't think I need to go through this in much more detail, because it's been spoken about a lot. This higher protein levels within these diverse swards is becoming very evident from the trial that was being described today, and all sorts of other research that's gone out there, along with the high mineral content. So some really nice work that came out of Rothamsted, looking at particular sort of plot trials of specific species, really highlighted the value of chicory and plantain and yarrow of having some of these really high levels of micronutrients compared with the perennial ryegrasses. And so, all of this combined adds to a much more nutrient dense diet, which is going to improve, reduced the need to provide supplements, but also obviously overall reduce the risk to the animal in terms of being deficient in any of these minerals. I think a key thing, this is some of the data that came out of the TOMS project, and again, telling a very similar story in terms of the value of chicory and plantain for some of these micronutrients. And I think a key part is both the species themselves, but obviously, massively impacted on soil type, and also the soil structure and the presence of different nutrients within that soil and how those plants are able to bring up nutrients from the soil. And a key part is the deep rooting nature of them, but also improving soil structure or overall, and increasing soil organic matter will enable them to, take up more of the nutrients from the soil overall than just the shallow rooting perennial ryegrass alone. But I think this has all been covered very nicely already. So in order to not take up too much more time, I just wanted to focus for a second on the positive welfare benefits. So welfare largely has been focused on absence of harmful measures, and a lot of the work and monitoring around welfare is largely focused on measuring sort of the negative aspects, whether that's lameness or injury or levels of illness within the health aspects. But there's very much, a turning tide, both within the dairy cow welfare strategy and through the British Veterinary Association, a lot of focus on discussing positive welfare and the need to make sure that we provide a good life for our farm animals. So we've been working on these frameworks, looking at how you can really focus on positive experiences and how those could be defined so that we can, one, look at different systems and how they're delivering positive experiences for animals, but also then think about how we could increase those positive experience where we feel that there may be gaps. So these frameworks that I've been working on with a number of other academics have been developed through academic research, and now we're looking to take them into more of an applied approach through creating these handbooks and then going out on farm and piloting them. And so the positive experiences that are highlighted are broken down into these areas of comfort, pleasure, confidence, interest, and a healthy life. And I just wanted to show the example where the Herbal Leys really fit in, excuse me, and that's around this sort of pleasure through food enrichment. So the research evidence, provides really compelling argument for why you would provide more food types to allow choice and control of that animal in selecting the things that they like, prefer, and having choice. And that has had evidence that it improves health, reduces stress, and is associated with positive feelings. And cows have shown preference for these more diverse diets of legumes and species-rich pastures. So I think it's, really important as we sort of pull all of these different aspects into a whole health approach, that we're focusing on both the reduction of the negative, so parasite burdens or nutrient deficiencies and all of those things, but also what the positive aspects can bring in terms of having this diversity in their diet, both the species that you're providing, but also rotational grazing systems as you move animals on, so they're provided with, fresh pasture regularly, also provides a much more interesting outdoor environment. And then just to note, when they're inside, obviously having diverse swards, having more species within silages and hay that they're being offered, again, provides more variability and more interest in it, and has evidence that it has a positive effect on their well-being. So I have been developing, a group of us have been developing these frameworks, and we're looking now to go into a pilot phase, particularly on the dairy cow one. We've been doing some work on the beef and sheep frameworks. And so going out to farms so that they can have a look through the different opportunities that are detailed within the framework, that are classed within these 3 levels of tier, and seeing how their farms are performing, giving us some feedback on what's included, and generally having a bit of a chat about where they see the value in the framework. So if you would be interested in taking part at all in that pilot process, I'll get Laura to make sure she shares my details afterwards. Do let me know, because we would really like to get out to as many different farms as possible to get their feedback and see how they're performing on the framework. But I'll leave it there, because I know there'll be lots of questions to get through, and pass on to Hannah, I think, who's going to mop up any last bits.
Okay, I'll just share a minute. Laura, is that okay?
Yeah, I can't see the full screen, but it can see the presentation, but not in the full screen mode.
There we go. Okay.
There you go.
Yes. Hello, everybody. I'm going to be super quick. A lot of my thunder has been stolen by previous speakers, which is not an issue at all. I'd just like to highlight, I'm going to bring together a whole range of different project datas, and I'm going to drop into different ones. The first one, the Tom's project that Kate briefly mentioned, was a Agritech Cornwall project, and Gemma Eels, who I work with, is also on this call, and with Stephen Roderick and Betham Stagg. So I'll talk about that one briefly. I also did some work on Herbal Ley establishment in the Helen project, which was FIPL funded. I'll drop into that data, which also supports the work that Tom was talking about with establishment. And I also worked on a BVSRC project called Diverse Forages. So I'm going to spot around, but it also links to the Farm Net Zero, which I was heavily involved in with Andrew. So lottery funding, Agritech Cornwall funding, FIPL funding, and BVSRC funding. So thank you, everybody, for that. And I hate to miss out anybody. So do apologise for me skipping forward, but I'm just going to try and pick out what's really might add a bit of value to those listening today. Key point, plant for every situation. We think about docks as a problem, but how can we use species to our advantage? And I think Andrew highlighted that perfectly when plantain grows beautifully in the weeds. It's a really good weed in Cornwall, but also hugely advantageous. So no longer a weed, really. On farm, your Herbal Ley will grow completely different depending on your conditions. I have 2 Herbal Leys here, identical seed mixes. A 2-week sowing window can alter the composition and your whole nutrient application regime. So we saw in Andrew's trial, the clover went up to a high level, a good level, and that's because of his nutrient use strategy. So on the left here, you can see a Herbal Ley that's got a lot of slurry, compounds and straights, and it's much less clover compared to the right, which is deep silt, farm manure and very acid. So I'm really interested in how on your farm, what conditions are you able to change and in your soil and make the most of what you got as well. So I'm going to drop into that. So apologies for me skipping forward because I have got 5 minutes to move forward. So just as an example, species selection, which is one of the things I was asked to talk about. We have got a range of Herbal Leys that were grown in the southwest. So I'm just picking out the sites here. We've got a low pH of 5.3 to 5.6, high soil organic matter, and on a slope. And I've got species presence in those Herbal Leys, multiple quadrats replication. I can provide you the details. But in these soils, there's low calcium, low copper, low boron, magnesium, and chicory would not grow. Yarrow thrived very well on those acid conditions. And Timothy was there a sensible and a good presence, allowing that Herbal Ley to extend over multiple years. We had another trial at West St Stephen's in Cornwall, wet, low-lying, close to neutral pH. And what we have here is you can see sheep's parsley did really badly. It likes a free draining soil, but our chicory was thriving because we're close to an acid soil. And then we have a sort of coastal in the southwest. Again, the same trial. Chicory didn't like this was weed chicory, so the farmer didn't even want it in his mix. It couldn't help it but thrive. So chicory loves that free draining, neutral pH conditions, and plantain can cope. Is a universally valuable herb because it can cope with acids, the alkali, but what it really doesn't like is dry conditions at early establishment. And then we've got the lizard, heavy, wet clay soils. And one species that's really good for heavy wet is the tall fescues, whereas many of the other species that were in that Herbal Ley mix didn't thrive. So I've got a summary slide just to highlight those species for you. So quite often with the farmers I work with, they think their Herbal Ley has failed because the chicory is not there, but actually there's a whole range of species that can deliver a lot of benefits, and chicory and plantain make a really good team. If you've got plantain, you might not need chicory so much. So there's a kind of redundancy with that whole range of different species. So use that diversity to your advantage. So If you can't grow chicory, it might be because it's too damp, or you maybe need to tweak that pH, but plantain will also do a good job as well. So overseeding, just to add on to the data that Tom was talking about, this is a trial over 12 fields, I think it was. The farmers are trying direct drill, tine drill, but this is overseeding permanent pastures. So this is really tough conditions. This was in Cornwall National Landscape. So there are specific regulations on that land, and I had a great help with Cornwall Wildlife Trust in this project. So in this slide, you can see all the different variables that we're working with. I'm just going to flip forward. The key points with a complete eye on time, and all these details are on the Farm Carbon Toolkit website. So if you look up the Helen project, the key point here is if you are going to overseed a herbal ley into your permanent pasture, make sure the regulation in place to allow you to do that. The second point is a rotoseeder or a rotavator plus seeder was by far the best. And in this plot, we've got the mean number of species per quadrat. I scored 1,220 quadrats just to make sure this data was reliable. And we've got direct drill, which is direct seeding. In the middle, we've got moderate disturbance, which is a tine seeder. And maximum disturbance allowed within these landscapes was a rotoseeder. And the rotoseeder or rotavator plus seeder was the most effective in species establishment, but half glyphosate or full rate glyphosate were equivalent, and they did actually allow more species to establish. But if you're in an organic situation, as Tom explains, maximize the top level disturbance, so break up any soil compaction, but going down to 10 centimeters depth is adequate to get a really good herbal ley establishment. And as you'd expect, I looked at soil health, and the tine weeder was better at reducing surface compaction compared to rotoseeder and direct. But sometimes you have to go with what your contractor is what's available for your contractor, or what drills you've got available. But just try and get that seed tilth as good as you can, and just do a trial run, check your soil conditions, make sure you've got a good seed to soil contact, just to get that establishment going. So I'm going to flip through these, excuse me, because of time. So this is the summary of data. So if you're free draining above pH 5.5, you've got your stalwarts, the red clover, white clover, ryegrass, timothy. Chicory can cope with that, and sheep sparsely likes that free draining conditions. If you're free draining at or below pH 5.5, you need to switch and look at integrating plantain and yarrow. They can cope with that low pH. And with heavy soils, chicory won't like it very much, but go in with your tall fescues and plantain, and they'll do a good job for you. So these were the conditions within the Cornish landscape. I've seen herbal leys with lucerne thriving, but that, as I said, this was not part of this trial. Okay. So adjust pH where possible, address compaction. If you have a rotoseeder, consider half rate glyphosate. It's just as good as full rate glyphosate. Direct seeder is good for worms, but species establishment may well be less. Okay, so Tom's project was mentioned, and Gemma Eels and also a partner's project, Beth and Stagg, produced a fantastic website from the Tom's project. This is the website, and all the data is on there, beautifully put together. I'm going to flip through here. The key element which I wanted to highlight, because Kate actually presented some of our data, there's when coming to nutrient deficiencies in animals, one of our partners in this project, a vet, as part of this project, is particularly keen on what mineral deficiencies can we avoid with sward management, and what mineral deficiencies can be avoided if we use multi-species swards. So key elements: 9 farms over 2 years, 3 time points of sampling, and looking at micronutrient assessments. So one question that came through in the chat was, yes, ash is higher in Herbal Leys. Yes, micronutrients and minerals are higher in Herbal Leys. And from our work in the southwest, sulfur, boron and calcium are significantly higher in Herbal Leys compared to ryegrass and white clover. Nitrogen was higher in the grass clover swards compared to Herbal Leys, but that depends on your nitrogen management. There was no difference in yield, crude protein or ME, so that's metabolizable energy difference across farms, which supports the data that Daniel presented. And digestibility was higher in Herbal Leys late in the season, which links exactly to what took place on Ennisbarge at Andrew's farm, where Daniel presented the NDF data. So again, lots of evidence and supporting findings in the literature as well. So just coming back to those micronutrients, you can get some really awesome maps of your area of where you've got nutrients, soils that are rich based on the bedrock in certain micronutrients and those that are not rich. Now, sometimes, and this is where the vet's expertise was just awesome. This is called Patrick McCotter, and he was saying, right, if I've got a nutrient deficiency, say in copper, but my soils contain copper, Herbal Leys can actually access that. So, for example, if we look at copper content in burnet, chicory, plantain, self-heal, and yarrow, chicory and yarrow are significantly higher in copper. Therefore, if your soils have adequate copper levels, but there's a deficiency in your bulk forage samples and or you have a suspected deficiency, that's where the advantage of adding these additional species to your swards are concerned. I'm going to flick through because I'm running out of time. The same is the case for calcium. Herbal Leys are particularly good at accumulating calcium. And in dairy systems, if you think of what's coming off your farm, you're taking in your milk, you've got carbon, nitrogen, as far as carbohydrates and protein in your, you've got a tiny bit of sulfur, and you've got a lot of calcium coming off your farm as far as are you replacing it? Low calciums can lead to tight soils and a propensity to get high dock infestation. So check your soil level, calcium levels in your soil. You want to get about 1,000 parts per million calcium or above. But Herbal Leys will help regulate and bring up deep calcium for your swards. Let's flip over that because Kate presented that. And I'm going to flip over that just to say, as part of Farm Net Zero, there was an additional field lab called Forge, which looked at the effect of chicory-rich Herbal Leys on the rearing of lambs. And I just encourage you to have a look at that if you have also sheep in your system. Okay, so different species provide different benefits for your livestock. Second guessing which species thrives combines soil type management variations between fields and establishment, and it's a really tricky business. So experimentation and all the data collection that Tom and Andrew are doing, which is absolutely brilliant. It allows really directed focus of attention. So use of species diversity provides considerable buffer to environment, but you cannot replace minerals that aren't there. Right, and I'm going to get rid of that because we've run out of time. And I'd just like to thank all the funders, as I mentioned earlier. Right, okay, I'm done.
Thank you, Hannah, and I'm really sorry everyone that we got so squeezed. I'm really sorry that my timekeeping for webinars is clearly appalling, so I'm really sorry about that. If anyone is around, and I realise the speakers and people have to get on, but maybe we could address some of the other questions in the next sort of 5 minutes and keep the recording on. But just before we do that, just to say thank you so much to all our speakers. That's been such a lot of interesting information, and I'll probably be watching this back again so that I can actually soak up a lot of it, because there was a lot there. So it's been really great. So thank you very much for speaking, and thank you for being so generous with your time and with sharing your experiences and knowledge. And thank you for all the funders who've been funding all the various projects we've talked about, and the Farm Net Zero project. And it's all been, there's a lot of work going on here. And I think the more we can share it, the more we can talk about the individual experiences that, and the individual practices that farmers are doing on farms and trialing, the more everyone learns, and I think that's really important. So thank you very much for everyone for coming to the webinar today. Brilliant. If you have to leave, you have to leave. If we could do 5 minutes extra just discussion. Would that be okay? For anyone who's able to, that would be great, and we'll keep the recording running if that's all right. Well, okay, I'll just read out a couple of the questions then, if that's all right. Tom and Kate, what fungal bacteria ratio were you aiming to get to? Because you showed us a graph, Tom. And was the fungal bacterial ratio consistent across all the trial sites?
I'm aiming for 1-to-1. 1-to-1. So bacterial dominated soils will be weedy. That would be your just bacteria, and then 1-to-1 is what I've learned is the correct growing conditions for grasses, herbs, and your cereals. And then going on from that would be your shrubs, bushes, and then on to forests and much higher. But there's I think Daniel and Adam from I think it's Soil Eco Lab, Daniel Turkill, he did some trials, some potting trials, and they found to stop weed germination, you had to get to 18-to-1 bacterial to fungal ratio, which is quite interesting. And no, they weren't all the same. There was a big difference.
Okay, thank you. And that report is going to be put up on the website fairly soon, as it's just finished off. So that will be able to share all the findings from all the different farms that took part in that trial. Case asks, we've had farmers struggle with the dry matter difference between ryegrass and clover and herbal leys when going from one field to another. Have you found any way of easing this transition, either to Tom or Andrew or both?
Just accept the fact they might drink a bit less water one day, being blunt. They'll drink, does it really affect it? Just look at their dung. Are they full?
Okay. Brilliant, thank you. I think we've talked about the higher mineral content. Was there anything else to add, Mark? Does the higher mineral content of multi-species swards have any effect on cow health or having a potential reduction in the need for supplementation? And there was another question about whether the farmers saw any difference in the use of medicines or medical treatments or pharmaceuticals when you're using the herbal leys or the multi-species swards. So sort of combine those questions.
I can jump in, and I think if that's okay, at least for the trial that we ran at Andrews, what I said previously, we didn't have enough animals to look at some of these variables, and you could potentially look at blood sampling and things like that, but we didn't carry out this type of sampling. And yeah, we'll take it with a pinch of salt, comparing the only 26 cows' health status between each other is very a limited amount of number of animals that you can compare with.
Andrew and Tom, I don't know if there's any sort of anecdotal evidence that you've sort of noticed.
Not really. The trial's probably not long enough. We probably want to look at a longer, almost a whole lactation or multi-lactation again. So it's a time frame thing to really see those small differences. And like Daniel said, you maybe have to study blood samples or even liver biopsies to really see if there's any difference in mineral uptakes as well to the animal.
I don't have any data on that or anything, but just going back to the dry matter one of the things we've done is if you raise your covers in and out, you can allow for a change of dry matter without underfeeding. So if you're happy to see, if you're aiming for a 1700 cover and you're happy to see a 1900 cover or a 1500 cover, that would allow any dry matter changes not to affect yield or body condition score or energy intake.
Okay, brilliant. Bridget asks, is there any long-term data on persistency of variety under dairy grazing pressure? Are there any strategies emerging? Anyone like to take that one?
One part that I was unable to highlight is that herbal leys will evolve with time, and that is because some species are short term, like biennials, and then some much longer term. So the best long-term strategy is paddock grazing, light grazing, but that herbal ley will become more grassy over time because your soil conditions are changing. So I think persistence the species that last for a long time are yours, obviously the white clovers, the yarrows, and bird's-foot trefoil, and timothies, and you will naturally lose your chicories. I would say if you lose your herbs within 18 months, it's been overgrazed. But for a sensible level of diversity, maybe 6, 8 species, that 3 years you'd expect those to maintain. But I've seen herbal leys that have been 8 years or so. And one strategy is to allow that herbal ley to flower and seed at one time point within a given year, and that can enable persistence for a longer time frame.
We would use maybe different grazing strategies to what you're seeing or what you're not seeing. So if you think your 21 to 25 day rotational grazing suits ryegrass, suits white clover, so if that is your grazing strategy, you'll probably graze out your herbal ley to that over a 3 to 5 year process. If you extend the covers and do trampling, you'll probably see more clovers and more herbs stay. And if you go as far as doing standing hay, you might actually get the opportunity to reseed with what is at seed at that point through that process. So you can adapt and adjust, but just be aware that the grazing strategy you choose will probably determine what you will see over time.
I would just agree with Tom on that. It's horses for courses, and you almost need to identify a field. If you think it needs reseeding, we would take that to standing hay for calving on, and it will basically reseed itself before it gets too far of having the wrong species in.
Brilliant. Thanks, everyone. Last question, if that's okay then. This one is to Tom specifically, but to anyone else. Can you elaborate on milk yields with the longer rotations? As this seems to be one of the greatest perceived fears amongst slightly more conventional graziers, and also your conclusions as to what suits your system best in terms of entry and exit.
This is a really big and probably really important question for this topic. And I think there was huge learnings from the farmers involved on how to moderate grazing quality, milk yield, and average cover on your fields. And unfortunately, like everything on these sort of living systems, it's not a constant. We've had fields of 4,500 kilos of dry matter per hectare with 5 living leaves on a perennial ryegrass plant. So does that mean that you can graze perennial ryegrass at 4,500 kilos of dry matter and not lose milk? No. When we started the mob grazing trial, we tried to go in at a cover of 5,000 on our very tired, worn out trial feed, which is why we chose it. And we crashed milk because that 5,000 cover on that particular field in that particular sort of season, time of that season meant that we still were only able to grow 2.5 living leaves at that point in that field. So we had a huge amount of stem and dead leaf as a proportion of that plant. If you've got soil function and root mass equaling above ground biomass, if you haven't got enough soil function or root mass to support living leaves, your leaves will drop off to manage what the plant can cope with. It will always support itself before the leaves. So you can go in on much higher covers and trample and maintain quality in milk, but you have to earn that right. It's probably slightly easier on a herbal ley than a ryegrass ley because you've got plants like red clover or chicory or plantain that have got a different stem to leaf ratio as they grow. So it's doable, but you probably have to start slow and increase over a 3 to 5 year period. A model that we've sort of settled with is your first round is your first round. Let's just get out and graze it. Your second round, which is going to be pre-heading date, is probably going to be quite tight again. And then once we've gone through heading, then we're going to raise average covers in and out, and then pull it back again at the end of the season as a tidy up to make sure we've reset it for the next year. One thing I think that's really important when trialing these things is, or adopting these things, is there's rotational grazing, and there's mob grazing, or whatever you want to call it. But in the middle is bad grazing, and it's really easy to do the bad grazing. All you'll end up doing is eating the leaves and leaving a tall stem and increasing the growing point, which then increases the stem to leaf ratio in a bad way. And that is something that's really easy to do and hard to manage. I could go on for hours on that one.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I think we better leave it there because we've already overrun by quite a long way. So again, thanks very much everyone for coming. Thank you, speakers, and we'll try and follow up on some of this in a follow-up email where possible, and obviously we'll send out the recording and some of the links that we've shared in the chat as well. So everyone should have some access to that. But do get in touch with us on the IF email if you have any more questions. Brilliant. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.